Agreement Resolution number 112 of 2020, authorizing an agreement to reappoint city manager. Do we have a sponsor? Councilor Genatino, second by Councilor McCormick.
Agreement Resolution 112 of 2020. Whereas on April 15, 2016, the City Council of the City of Auburn appointed Mr. Jeffrey J. Dygert as interim city manager. Whereas Mr. Dygert satisfactorily served as interim city manager until October 10, 2016, at which time the City Council appointed him to the position of city manager pursuant to an agreement which expired on October 10, 2020. Whereas Mr. Dygert has satisfactorily served as city manager to the present time, and whereas now it is the desire of the mayor and the council that Jeffrey J. Dygert be reappointed as the city manager for the City of Auburn, pursuant to the terms of an updated agreement which is attached hereto and incorporated herein between the city and Jeffrey J. Dygert, which shall take effect retroactively as of October 10, 2020. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council does hereby approve an agreement attached hereto and incorporated herein between the city and Jeffrey Dygert, whereas Mr. Dygert accepts the reappointment to the position of city manager, and whereby the term shall take effect retroactively to October 1st, 2020. Be it further resolved, the mayor is authorized to duly execute the agreement, any and all other documents necessary to carry out the resolution.
Thank you. Councilor, I'm going to take the lead here, if I may. When Mr. Dygert advised us that he was probably going to be leaving us, I think we all felt a hole in our stomach, knowing how well Jeff has been and how great he's been for their city. Thought about it, and I took it upon myself. I did notify the other members of council that we wanted to ask Councilor Genatino and Councilor Castro to sit down with our city manager and try to iron out an agreement if one could be had on behalf of all of us in the entire city of Auburn. So with that, I would like to first turn to Councilor Genatino and then Councilor Castro for their thoughts and impressions in everything going on with Mr. Dygert's contract. So please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to work with Mr. Dygert and Councilor LaCastro. I have a prepared statement. I'm going to apologize in advance. It's a little lengthy, but I feel that it's important to state all this into the record. The single most important decision any council makes is determining who the city manager will be. 5 years ago, following the departure of Doug Selby, my colleagues and I went through the process of interviewing several candidates from all over the country. During that time, two things became abundantly clear. First, the candidates that we interviewed bounced from city to city and were simply looking for a job, and the City of Auburn would be nothing more than the next line on their resume. And second, the ideal candidate was the very person who stepped up to fill in as interim manager. That person was Jeff Dygert. Mr. Dygert's leadership style and skills were well known from his time in the fire department. In the few short months that he was interim manager, he took the leadership to the next level. The term city manager isn't my favorite term, and I'm going to explain why. Management consists of controlling a group to accomplish a goal. Leadership is an individual's ability to influence, motivate, and empower those around him to contribute to the collective good of an organization. Mr. Dygert embodies leadership, and the results are undeniable. I would argue that he has redefined the role of city manager in the last 5 years. In his tenure as city manager, he and city staff have collectively worked to address the many challenges our city has faced and have had significant success. And I'd like to take some time to talk about those. They have been successful in securing tens of millions of dollars in economic development and infrastructure funding from the state and federal government. $10 million in DRI funding, $10 million in URI funding, nearly $14 million in bridge and culvert projects, and another one is on the way for Aurelius Ave, $5 million to reconstruct Genesee Street, $3 million in funding for a public safety building, a project nearly 3 decades in the making. They addressed the drinking water crisis head-on by securing funding for and implementing a new treatment system in a matter of months, ensuring that 45,000 people would be able to continue to have clean drinking water. Since then, they have worked diligently to enact measures to protect the long-term health of Owasco Lake, including the formation of the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council and the recent local adoption of watershed rules and regulations. Mr. Dygert was initially tasked with hiring a new police chief that on day one had to address a department that suffered from extremely low morale. That same police chief, like others across the country, has had to deal with increased public scrutiny and calls for increased transparency. He has risen to the occasion, and Mr. Dygert has been right there by his side. This was evident yesterday in the meeting that we had. When we had large protests locally, they were done so in a peaceful manner, and this was due in large part to the hard work and proactive approach the Chief and Mr. Dygert took early on. Mr. Dygert has successfully negotiated agreements with all of our collective bargaining units. These agreements were fair and equitable to the employees and the taxpayers that city employees serve. They were handled completely in-house, where in the past outside lawyers were hired. This saved taxpayers a significant amount of money, as did Mr. Dygert's efforts to reduce health care costs by requiring a new, lower-cost health insurance plan. It was brought up tonight in the public to be heard that we were decreasing Mr. Dygert's contribution to the health insurance plan. This is in line with the agreements that have been negotiated with the collective bargaining agreements. He was able to build much-needed trust with our city workforce that provides the essential services we all rely on daily. Over the last 8 months, Mr. Dygert and his staff have had to address the reality of a pandemic and its impact on our community, both the public health aspect and the financial impact. I have personally sat in on the weekly conference calls, and I can assure you we are all in good and capable hands as we continue to navigate through this crisis. When the pandemic initially hit, Mr. Dygert reached out to the county. We had a group meeting on a Sunday afternoon, and Mr. Dygert made it extremely clear to the chairperson of the county legislature and to the county health department that the city was here to assist in any way that we possibly could. I also personally witnessed him going from business to business on a Friday afternoon, reaching out to see how the city could help them. He has consistently worked with other entities such as Cayuga County and Cayuga Community College to share services and ultimately save us all money. An example of this is a partnership with CCC to utilize Falcon Park. This saved millions of dollars, and with the potential departure of minor league baseball from Auburn, it left us with a long-term use for Falcon Park. I want to talk a little bit about the numbers and how we reached the number that is ultimately in his contract. 5 years ago, Mr. Dygert's initial contract had a starting salary of $115,000. If you compare this to other salaries for similar positions, this was a low number, but we all felt, including Mr. Dygert, that it was justifiable because he did not have prior experience. Since successfully fulfilling the obligations of his original contract, Mr. Dygert has gained that experience and has a proven track record. In negotiating the terms of this new contract, we took into consideration how other administrators in our area are compensated. Not every city has a city manager form of government, so we had to look at administrators not only in cities but in other similar organizations. For example, the city manager of Norwich is compensated at a rate of $150,000 per year, but has a population of 7,500 citizens. The city manager of Corning is compensated at $165,000 per year. The superintendent of Auburn schools is compensated at $172,000 a year. The college president of Cayuga Community College is compensated at $204,000 per year. And the CEO of our local hospital is compensated at $430,000 a year. I feel that we've come to a fair agreement. I hope that it will be unanimous. As the mayor mentioned, Councilor Castro stepped up and worked with us on this, and I'd like to thank him for working with us in a bipartisan manner to get this done. It's for the betterment of the city and for the people of the city of Auburn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Castro, if you would like to weigh in, you're the other part of our bargaining team.
Maybe I should have went first, Jim, after that. With so much going on with the COVID, I feel it could get very costly with personnel changes at City Hall right now. Do we live in a perfect run city? Probably not. But I do believe that Jeff Dygert cares and gives 100% daily. For that reason, I will vote yes.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Cuddy, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a statement in support of the renewal of the contract for City Manager Jeff Dygert, along with the deserved affirmation of the proposed pay increase. As most Auburnians know, we have a city manager form of government. This form of government has served the city for generations and continues to do so in the present. The city manager is the chief executive of the city and serves at the behest of the 5-member council that sits before you all today. We are elected by the people of Auburn and make the laws and major decisions that guide the city of Auburn on a weekly basis. But it is the city manager who makes the day-to-day decisions on the behalf of the people of Auburn. There is no body I trust more, no person I trust more to serve the city of Auburn at this time than Mr. Jeffrey Dygert. Mr. Dygert has served the city of Auburn for most of his adult life in public safety as a firefighter and worked up the ranks to become fire chief. Over 5 years ago, when the city council had to hire a new city manager, then city manager Doug Selby suggested that Mr. Dygert be considered as the interim manager as the city conducted a search for the next city manager. Over the preceding months, during the search, it became apparent that the interim city manager was the right person for the job. Even though it appeared to the public that the council was taking a risk hiring a city manager without the traditional experience city managers have, we knew we were hiring the right person for the job. We then negotiated a contract based on his experience with the support that any manager would need from an elected body that represents the people of the city. I would characterize Mr. Dygert's tenure as city manager a success, a track record that includes creating a codes cleanup crew that maintains the abandoned properties throughout Auburn, helping bring tens of millions of dollars of grant money into the city of Auburn, working with local employers and businesses to expand, grow, and hire more employees in the city of Auburn, working closely with the comptroller to keep our financial house in order and increase our credit rating with Moody's, hiring a human resources director to streamline employee workflows. I could go on with many successes like this, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the most important facet of Mr. Dygert's time as city manager. He has been at the helm during this pandemic. He is here early in the morning and stays late in the day. On a daily basis, he draws upon his public safety experience, his even-handed management style, and his keen intuition to keep the city of Auburn moving and its people safe. Every day, clean water comes through our spouts. Our roads and parks are maintained. Our refuse is picked up weekly. Every day, the police and fire department are ever ready to show up at a moment's notice. Every day, city staff is planning to navigate through this crisis and are preparing for when Auburn will thrive after the pandemic ends. All of this is done under the day-to-day leadership of Mr. Dygert. This renewed contract is acknowledging all that Mr. Dygert already does for the people of this city. The renewed contract recommits Mr. Dygert to this most important role. The people of Auburn deserve the best. With Jeff Dygert, they have this, and they will continue to have him working for them over the next 5 years.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor, anything?
Yes. Pretty much anything I could say has already been said. I don't want to repeat it, but I do have a few things to add. Without COVID, without this pandemic crisis, if that had never happened, our city manager, Jeff Dygert, was doing an outstanding job. There was crisis and day-to-day fires, no pun intended, to put out, that he did with confidence, and he just handled the things that were coming up. When he first took on this responsibility of city manager was when our water crisis was just unfolding, and we'd had to do a search for a new police chief. All of this happened. We had faced that Auburn Doubledays may or may not be staying with us, and he worked with us. And the other thing that I recall from the first year, the morale of city employees was very poor, and that included city management, the managers within the administration. Jeff worked with people. He earned their trust. He earned, as we've talked about, he earned the trust of our towns and a lot of the other stakeholders that rely on the community. But in facing with the city and the county, facing the pandemic and all the fallout that it brings to our well-being, the well-being of residents, and the economy of a small city, It does take a strong, experienced, compassionate, and consistent leader to see us through this. And that is what we have in Jeff Dygert. We have that and more. As the crisis is happening with no sign of slowing down, many other critical issues along with day-to-day operations of the city are happening. The operations of the city are essential services to city residents, and in the case of delivering clean, safe drinking water to 45,000 county residents, it's even more critical. And Mr. Dygert has been a key player, key person in leading us to get through this crisis along with Seth Jensen. We will be recovering from this crisis for years. The economy, the city businesses, everything is going to rely on leadership. Mr. Dygert has built a team of outstanding managers and leaders within the city administration. He knows how to delegate and give responsibility to make things happen. In the last 4 or 5 years, things that weren't moving anywhere, that were just dragging and dragging. For example, hiring a human resource director, it just wasn't happening. Mr. Dygert made it happen. There's other examples of that I won't go into, but he made things happen that either saved the city money, city taxpayers, or saved money or brought in money for the city. The city staff has come together with the city manager to take on all the challenges as a team. I think the city is in good hands. I think that, as Assemblyman Finch said, leadership does matter. There's a long list, as you've heard, of things that Mr. Dygert has done to strengthen and improve the city. I can't say enough about what he's done to keep the boat afloat, as you will. When I first met Mr. Dygert, I was a brand new city councilor, and he was fire chief. He had just had to lay off, because of budget cuts, 6 firefighters. That was something devastating to not only the firefighters, but not anything that Chief at the time, Dygert, wanted to do. But in talking with him and working through it, we managed to hire people back. He worked hard to get grants. And talking with him, I also learned he has a vision for public safety that because we're so busy, I think he has yet to even talk about. But it's something that will be good for the entire community. He looks forward, and he plans, and he's proactive. And I think we are fortunate to have Jeff Dygert as our city manager, and I will be proud to vote to renew his contract. It's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. As it turns out, 47 years ago today, I started with the City of Auburn as a backstep firefighter. They said, "Kid, here's your helmet and your boots and your coat. If the bell hits, get on the truck, stay out of the way, and don't say nothing." So I tried that for as many days as I could. Then I had to say something like, "What's for lunch?" or whatever. But during that time, we've been through so many city managers. 1 or 2 of them have served 2 terms. Others, I wish they had stayed in the Midwest. And some that were from the East Coast here, I wish they had stayed on. But everything in life is meant for a reason. You may not know at the time what the reason is, what the outcome is going to be, but it works out for the better. To be very honest, when I was fire chief, Jeff was union president, our conversations always became animated at times. Fair?
Spirited.
Fair?
Sure.
Okay. But he had one goal in mind, to take care of his firefighters in the city of Auburn, and depending on the situation, either was in first place. Today, he's the same way. He has a great knack of looking ahead, where we should be going, where we are, and how are we going to get here. Myself, as many of you, know other city workers. And it's very seldom that I don't run into a city worker off property here, and they tell me what a good job Jeff is doing. For members of the rank and file to acknowledge the city manager is doing a good job, that says an awful lot. It was not prompted out of them. It comes out of a clear blue. So that tells me we're doing something right. in regards to the newspaper article today, 22% pay raise. I was disturbed about that. But if you think about it, if you have $1 and you have 22% of that, what would you be getting, a 22% or 22-cent raise? If it was $100 million and you got 22% of that, probably could buy all of us for that amount of money. It's a considerable difference. I didn't care for the reporting or the headline, but I was taught long ago, don't pick a fight with a company that buys ink by the barrel, so I won't go further down that road. But Jeff has meant an awful lot to the council, to the city in general, everything going on with COVID and such. I'm very proud and pleased that he's decided to stay, and I'm very proud and pleased to continue to work with him in the near future, for the length of his contract anyway, whatever that amounts to. Years ago on council, and then worked my way up through the ranks, we'd be getting a new city manager. And everybody you met on the street says, why can't we get one that lives here in the city of Auburn? Why do we have to go outside the city to hire a city manager? Now we do that, and everyone's against what his pay rate may be. I would just love for Jeff one time to sit down and figure out a week's schedule, how many hours he works, and what his pay rate is. And it probably doesn't come out to more than $4 or $5 an hour. So just knowing him for the number of hours he puts in. Jeff, after tonight, you feel you can walk on water, but we all come back to work tomorrow, and it changes. But I thank Councilor Genatino and LaCastro for working on this contract, and I thank the other Councilor Cuddy and McCormick for supporting this and supporting our fellow councilors. And Jeff, I'm thankful and hopeful that you're going to say yes when we get done voting here this evening. So, and we're not going to give you any time to second guess. Councilor McCormick.
One more thing that I want to add to address the issue of the city manager's evaluation. And if you want to, we've been meticulous in doing that year after year. We do, the grading and the comments, and we sit down with the city manager. We've done that with every city manager since I've been a councilor. We absolutely do an evaluation.
Absolutely.
So
and they are locked in the file cabinet in the mayor's office. They're there. That's where they will remain locked for till I'm done, as far as I'm concerned. Something else came to mind, but I guess I'll just cut myself off at this point. Any further discussion? Clerk, if you'll call the roll, please.
Councilor McCormick?
Aye.
Councilor Genatino?
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy?
Yes.
Councilor LaCastro?
Yes.
Mayor Quill?
Aye.
Carried.
Congratulations, Mr. Dygert. Now that we voted, would you like to say anything, or you just want to hold it for another day?
Well, I just want to say a couple things. First of all, thank you for your support. Thank you for your confidence 4.5 years ago and tonight. Obviously, it's an uncomfortable position, if you can imagine sitting here in a public session, having people discuss you and your compensation, right? So I appreciate your kind words. I appreciate a lot of the things you've said, but as I look out here and I see 5 department heads from the City of Auburn who are largely responsible for a lot of the projects and successes that you talked about, I want to make sure that they know that I appreciate everything they do, because essentially, in my mind, they are the pilots of this wide variety of aircraft, and I have the role of the air traffic controller. Really, they're doing the work, and I'm just trying to keep them from crashing into each other and making sure they're landing and taking off appropriately. And that can certainly be its own task at times. We've got a great team. I consider all those folks colleagues and friends. And I just want to make sure that they understand that I realize that as well. And I know you do. The council does as well. You're very open and appreciative about that, and you share that on a regular basis. But that's what's making this all work. I think we've got great stuff going on. But I think we've got great challenges ahead as well, because everything we thought we knew was going to be different here, I think. When we get through between COVID and everything else, the world changes at a pace that seems to increase on a daily basis, and we've got to be nimble enough to keep up with those changes and anticipate what's happening. I don't think government typically is good at that, and I think we've gotten better at that, and that's thanks to a lot of forward-thinking staff that we have here. So I want to thank them, and then thank you, and know that I'll continue to probably be one of the biggest ambassadors for the City of Auburn that you've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Panicked for a minute. I thought you were going to say, I don't think I want to do this. So